Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel Westman, and I'm the GA for Student Engagement in the Office of the Graduate School. Thank you all for joining us for this Zoom workshop. I just wanted to quickly go over a few tips while in this meeting. First, please keep yourselves muted unless the presenter asks for people to unmute. Second, if you have any questions or you want to respond to a question that was posed using the chat, just respond using the chat unless told to do otherwise. Also with the chat, you can privately chat with me or the presenter if there is something you wish not to share with the group. So if you want something to stay anonymous, you can use it that way. Lastly, I just want to thank you all for your time. Today we're going to be discussing resume, CVs, cover letters, and we have Elizabeth Mahoney from the Career Services Office presenting. So I'll let them go ahead and tell a little bit more about the presentation and what they do in the office.
Awesome. Thank you, Daniel. Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Mahoney with Career Services, and I'm one of your career counselors. As Daniel said, majority of our time today will be focused on talking about resume writing, CV writing, also talking about cover letters, and then also starting to talk about social media considerations when job searching and that type of thing, primarily focusing on LinkedIn. So let me see if I can get my... Okay, so today, again, just overview of career service and what our office does for our graduate students, and then we discuss the other, and I hope at the end we will have time for question and answers. As Daniel was saying, please feel free to go ahead and ask your questions in the chat box. I'll be checking that frequently to see if I can answer any questions for everybody, and if there's questions specific about technology, that type of thing, feel free to send it to Daniel privately, but we'll go ahead and begin. So first of all, want to make sure that everybody is aware of our office and how we can serve our graduate students. Again, with Career Services, and we work with students and recent alumni on everything from resume writing, cover letter writing, helping students and alumni find their jobs after college, as well as determining what they might want to do with their major or field of study. So a lot of times students may not be sure exactly what they want to do after graduation, so we help them with that. Along that line, we also help with, for undergraduate students or master level students, primarily, we help with graduate school admissions and that type of thing, especially support with the graduate school admissions essay. Another main thing that we do is we do host events on campus. So we host the all-campus career fairs, and we have one each semester, as well as we have our teacher employment days in the spring, and then our two-day event in the spring, and then we have our teacher employment day in the fall. And then finally, another big area is just support with helping students and alumni understand the networking, as well as interviewing tips and techniques and that type of thing. So really, when you think about the whole process of what somebody needs to go from college to career, is what we support with. Okay, so we're going to start out with resume writing, and really, when we think about why we write a resume, the ultimate purpose, and it's really interesting that I'm having this conversation with you all right now, because we had Cintas, an employer in Greeley, on campus today, talking to our business students, and said the same thing that I'm getting ready to highlight here, is really the ultimate purpose of a resume is to get the job interview. It's not to get the job, it's to get the job interview so that you can go in person and then really start to highlight your skill set and that type of thing in person. So keeping that in mind, I don't know about you all, but I would much rather be either through video or in person with somebody, getting a chance to potentially give some eye contact to them and that type of thing when talking about a job and my interest in a company, rather than just handing them a resume and hoping that it gets through the interwebs and that type of thing. So today what we're going to really do is talk about how to help your resume stand out so that you get to that next step of the job interview. And right now when I'm talking about resume, everything that I'm talking about for resume ultimately goes on a CV. And so definitely all of these tips, if you are in the space of wanting to develop a CV, definitely take all these tips in, and I will define like what are some differences as we move forward with the presentation. So really when we think about our resume or CV, we're also thinking about what is a highlight of your related and transferable skills. So everything from the things that actually relate to the position that you're looking for to anything that is non-related, but maybe leadership skills or very effective communication skills, management skills, depending on your industry, potentially helping skills, that type of thing. Okay, so this is an image. I like this image because it definitely is representative of how an employer feels when they have an open position. And I really like this because I've been on several search committees here at UNC for both our career counselor position, full-time career counselor positions, as well as our testing coordinator position. And you wouldn't believe the amount of resumes and documents that we get in when we have an open position. And so that keeping in mind is just knowing that the employer is most likely overwhelmed with the amount of applications. So again, they are short at least an employee, and then they have an open position, so likely they are taking on other duties, or at least the staff is taking on other duties for the open position. And then we have also the amount of applicants that are coming in. So when we think about that, we really want to think about how do we get our our resumes to really stand out to employers. So one of the main goals and tips that I have for you all is to really make it easy for them to review. The easier that you can make it for them to review, the more likely you're going to get through to where they're going to look at it a little bit more deeply. So especially when they first start to look at the resume, and we'll go over some tips on how to do that. But again, as I was talking about a little bit ago, when we had Centos here today, they basically said 6 to 10 seconds is the most that they take to look through a resume the first time. And then from there, they'll determine if they want to spend a little bit more time looking at it. Today, my hope is that you can come away with the ability to develop more of maybe a general industry-specific type of resume. The key to that being is just remember, as you're applying for active positions, if you're not currently applying, please, please, please make sure that you are tailoring your resume. So I always tell students, even our undergraduate students, where we generally recommend that they just have no more than a page for the resume, I always tell them to have a long working document that they can copy and paste the pieces they want for each employer. Because I think a lot of times that when people take an existing document and they're always just updating it, they feel like they're always having to recreate the wheel. So I think if you have a longer working document that you're able to get the language around the experiences that you want to share, the easier it is when it comes time to open for an open position that you're applying for, that you can pull from and say, hey, I want to actually highlight this experience, and here's the language that I have, and I just need to tweak the language a little bit, if that makes sense. I'll be kind of checking into questions here in just a couple of minutes. So we talked about how long the initial review is. Again, usually the initial review is 6 to 10 seconds. Again, keeping in mind that the main thing is you want to engage the employer so that they will continue to read your resume a little bit more after that. Okay. Any questions on like the just the goal of the resume and that type of thing? Doesn't look like I have anything coming up on the chat yet, so okay. All right, so now just going over a little bit about like the nuts and the bolts of a resume. So generally for graduate students, we definitely recommend 1 to 2 pages. Do remember that a resume is going to be a little bit shorter than like a CV, and again, we'll get into a little bit more of those specific differences in a moment. But again, keeping in mind probably 1 to 2 pages. the format of a resume, we recommend keeping it 0.5 to 1 inch margins. So there's a lot of ways that we can help you, or that you can help yourself with getting more information on your resume. So, and keeping in mind that you want as much of the pertinent information, the extremely pertinent information for an employer on that first page, because that's what they're going to be focusing on. We also recommend some sort of an easy font, and I've listed a couple here that are fairly easy to read, but an easy font to read. Try not to use italics. Sometimes with the scanning software that employers will use, or the applicant tracking system, sometimes the italics and different colors can definitely not show up as readable. So we recommend using like bold to help things stand out that you want to stand out quickly to the eye, and then again, easy to read. That also being said, probably about 10 point is about the lowest point font you would want to go for the body of the resume. Your name you always want to have stand out a little bit more. One of the main things, and Cintas was no different when they were on campus today, but one of the main things that they say, number one mistake that applicants make is grammar and spelling mistakes. So that's a good chance for me to remind everybody not just to rely on spell check and that type of thing, and definitely utilize our office for any support in that area. And especially like with your cover letter is definitely representation, and we're going to go over cover letter in a little bit, but your representation of like your ability to write and that type of thing. Sometimes with resumes, because we do recommend using bulleted statements rather than long paragraphs, sometimes they can feel a little bit like they're not complete sentences and that type of thing, and that is normal for a resume. But again, for your cover letter, definitely wanting to watch the grammar as well. When we're talking about subcategories, those are the things like name, education, skills or objective, or like professional summary or objective, related experience, maybe a field experience. If I was a teacher going into teaching, I might want to say teaching experience. Those are all very individualistic to you. We do have some recommendations, and we have a template on our website that's an editable template where you can just add in the information, has some recommendations. However, again, very individualistic to you. Every single person might have something a little bit different, but you definitely want to have some sort of, obviously, your contact information, either an objective statement, or even better would be like a summary of skills statement. Your education, you want to make sure that you're highlighting, and I get a lot of questions about education. Definitely make sure that you're highlighting the current degree that you're pursuing, and a lot of times you can do that. It would be the first one on under your education portion, because we are always doing the resume in reverse chronological order. So it starts with the most recent experience or education, even those that are present, and then continues back. And we do not have high school information, that type of thing. And that's what's a really cool thing about a resume, is that it's stuff that you get to pick and choose, which that's what I love about it. You know, when you're doing a job application and maybe they're saying, we want to hear about your employment history for the past 10 years, 5 to 10 years is usually what it is. Then in that case, you would need to list everything, all of your paid positions for the last 5 to 10 years, whatever they're saying that time frame is. But on your resume, let's say that there's one that's not as relevant, it's okay to keep it off. And I get that question a lot, so just keeping that in mind. There's also very strategic ways to make information that might be a little bit further down on your resume, if you were just to do a listed experience section, come up higher on your resume and stand out. And that's by making these subcategories a little bit smaller. So maybe relevant experience versus additional experience. Or again, you could do like a field, whatever your field or industry is, that type of experience versus something else. So for instance, something like for me, I might want to do higher ed experience versus like counseling experience versus additional experience for things that were not as related to the industry. We also, again, as I was starting to allude to, but recommend using short descriptor statements. And we recommend that you start those with an action verb. And on our website, we have a list of nice action verbs to kind of keep the mind going. Sometimes in certain fields, we can get some action verbs that tend to show up quite a bit. And so this will give you an idea. And I always like to do an exercise with students when they're looking at that list, because it divides it into different categories. And I encourage them to think about, okay, if you're thinking about your industry, what are the different categories that you would want to be highlighting action verb wise on your resume? And so that can kind of help you think about all of the different areas than maybe just some of the more obvious areas. Some of the maybe more transferable skill areas that you might want to be considering is definitely communication skills and any action verbs around that. Any under the management type of action verbs, or leading, or organization, and then a lot of them definitely can be industry specific. Sometimes depending on industry, but a lot of industries like the helping skills potentially, or there's detail skills, that type of thing. So those are, or action verbs. So those are ones that you might want to consider. Okay. So, and another thing, again, just to help with the ease of reading the resume, is really to make sure that your resume is consistent throughout. So that means not having a whole lot of different levels for the thing. So think about it visually, and knowing that we're reading from left to right. So thinking about everything should start on the left margin, for example. Maybe, again, using your bold to have things stand out. So all of your subcategories, maybe they would be bolded so that they can stand out and help with readability. Maybe your job title you want to stand out, so you would bold that, but you would do it for all of them, and that type of thing. And then another thing that I always like to talk about right now is just a reminder not to lie on your resume. Sometimes I wouldn't have this presentation if it weren't something that happened to us. So I'm going to give you a little story. During one of our more recent career counselor searches, we probably had about 40 applicants for the position, and we would always narrow it down to 10 for phone interviews, about 30-minute phone interviews with applicants, and then we narrow it down to 2 to 3 to bring on campus. So a couple of years we had that for our career counselor position, and we had an applicant that made it to the phone interview, made it on campus. On their resume, self-disclosed that they were fluent in Spanish. Came to campus, and we had 2 Spanish-speaking individuals on our search committee, and so they wanted to ask a question in Spanish to the candidate to test out that ability. The candidate unfortunately could not answer the question. It was a very easy question. It was basically our first question that we asked in English of why the career counselor position at the University of Northern Colorado. And they answered it very well in English, and they were not able to answer it in Spanish. Now, that is not a requirement that we had for a position, and that was something that they self-disclosed on our resume, and therefore we were able to test that out. And basically one of our values in the office is integrity. And so for us, that really moved a candidate from being top 1 of 3 to not even a consideration after that. So again, definitely don't lie on your resume. There is always that opportunity that you may be caught and either not hired for position, or even ultimately afterwards, if you're caught for that type of thing, potentially let go because of it. Okay, so I want to take a moment and see, please go ahead and chat. Let me know if there's any questions in the chat box. Okay, it seems like we are able to go on from that. Okay, so now to define experience for the resume. When we're looking at the resume, so what are the different things that you think would go on a resume? And wondering if people could go ahead and chat for me and just let me know what are some of the things that you would want to highlight on your resume under an experience section. So if you just go ahead and enter any comments of things that you think would be things that you would want to do in a resume. Okay, so somebody said related to clinical site and hours and specialty area, yes. And I'm not sure exactly what FMP is, but yes, anything that is, and I think that's one of the ones that definitely doesn't come through. Thank you, family practitioner nurse. Yes, so yes, anything that is related to your industry, and especially the things that aren't the paid things. So any like internships, any externships, anything like that, practicum experiences, that type of thing, or things that you would definitely want to highlight. Volunteer for 9 News Health, yes, I think so, and especially if it was industry experience. I also think there's a lot of things that putting volunteer positions can be really helpful on your resume. It lets employers know that you are engaged with the community, that you are doing other things while going to school, and that type of thing. Leadership experience, absolutely, and that is something that often gets, honestly, I see a lot of times as a one-liner, like chair of this organization. And really in those types, if you're a chair or vice chair or secretary or a treasurer of any of those positions, or actually a very active member, I think there could be potential for listing some of the details of what you're doing in that position. Group work with colleagues, yes, that would be another thing too to consider. Collaborate with teams to internships and volunteer experience, yes. So anytime you collaborate with teams, and I think it's more than just saying teamwork, it is talking maybe a little bit more about the project, what was the result of the project that you did, and that type of thing. So great, those are all wonderful ideas, and those are the types of experiences. And then of course we want to do all of our paid positions that often people think of right away that we get on there. And sometimes depending, but you know, depending on your area of industry, but you may want to do a selected or highlighted coursework section. So that might be something to consider as well. We see that a little bit more with undergrads, but definitely I think there could be some things, if there's some courses that you're taking outside of your everyday path of the industry that you're going into or your graduate work, definitely making sure that you're highlighting those types of things. Or if it's something that you can tell from an employer is something that they're really going to be engaged and interested in, then I would definitely somehow highlight that on your resume. Thank you. I think that's what I got from pretty much everybody. Thank you everyone for your comments. Oops, let me get over here. Okay. All right, so that was a little bit about resumes. Again, as I said before, everything that we talk about with resumes, we do want to carry forward and thinking about through our curriculum vitae. So when we think of curriculum vitae, it's really the Latin term for the course of life. And when I read that, and I realized that because I always felt like this curriculum vitae was such a big thing, and it is a big thing, but it's not that much different than a resume. It's really just, again, more things on it. So keeping that in mind, and of course when I say that, it is a complete professional picture of your professional body of work. So you want to keep that in mind. Mostly it is used in like academia, so higher ed, other academia, and science realms. So that's something to consider as well. And I always say as a guide for you all to think of if you should turn in a CV or a resume to an employer is go by what they're asking for. For all of our positions, and when I applied, I have a resume. I have a 2-page resume, and that's what I turn in. And that's what we ask. We don't ask for necessarily a 2-page, but we ask for a resume for our positions. We do not ask for a CV. Generally, employers don't want a CV if they're not asking for it, so that's something to really kind of keep in mind. Again, keeping in mind that those different industries are more likely to be asking for a CV, and that's valued a little differently too. But even me being in higher ed, I'm part of student affairs, and easily a resume is definitely what is needed for our area. A lot of times I encourage you to see if you can take a look at a faculty member's CV. There are going to be multiple pages, but generally we'll see CVs being 6 to 10 pages in length. And so that's kind of also giving you an idea. And then some of the things that we see is that it definitely tends to add more of an academic focus than maybe a resume. A resume is going to be much more based on work. So again, I think when you're thinking like, is this a CV or a resume? Maybe if you're finding that you are having like a long conference section that you're adding, if you're having multiple works that you authored or co-authored that you're adding to the resume, that's probably when it's starting to be maybe considered more of a CV, and very honestly hard to get into 2 pages. That being said, I always like to also kind of back up and say that for our people with, you know, that are writing a resume, but maybe they want to add some of these things to it, it is completely fine to add this type of stuff on your resume too. Again, just kind of keeping in mind, usually resumes for graduate students are around 2 pages, 2.5 at the most. And again, you can see the research accomplishments, publications, lots of different things. I think CVs can get very confusing. We're talking about ease of read for the employer. CVs can get very confusing visually, is what I have found when people bring in their CVs to me. And so I think if you can kind of think through the same steps as we're thinking through with the resume. So I want to keep all my information flowing and somewhat in order and that type of thing, and into smaller categories so that there's visual breaks for the reader and they're getting to see all of the good information that you have on it. So want to double check with everyone and see if there is any questions about CV, resume, anything like that. So I'm going to give you a moment to go ahead and click the chat box if you have any questions before moving on, because we'll move on to cover letters next. Okay, I am not seeing anything, so let's go ahead and continue on. Again, keep the questions coming if you have any. All right, so now we've been talking about resume, CV, and we've talked about targeting the resume. Well, actually, we're not quite moving to cover letters, so now we're going to really get into targeting the employer. I started to talk about that before, but how do you do it? So what I mean by targeting the employers, again, we talked about having that general, maybe longer working document that you're going from, and then really getting it specific for each company as you're applying. And I think I hope my tip by having a longer working document makes this process easier for you to target the employer successfully without feeling like you're always editing your resume and that type of thing. It's really more of a copying and pasting and then kind of tweaking language to make sure that and revisiting like the order of information that you have on the resume to make sure it's going to fit for the employer. So really your biggest guide to this is the job description. Okay, so job description, company website, those are things that you want to be looking at when you're looking at a company. And the really cool thing about starting that process of researching an employer as early as getting your resume or CV ready is the fact that by the time you're getting to interviewing, you already have a lot of knowledge about the employer. So I think that's really the neat thing. And I think it's a good time for you to have that self-reflection piece. If you start this work early in getting to know an employer, and you start to think, why am I a good fit for this company? What is it about me that this employer is going to be interested in, that type of thing? And then by the time they call you in for an interview, because that's what our resume or CV is for, is to get us to the interview, that's going to help you with really starting to be able to articulate. Hopefully you've been in our office practicing some interviewing or doing some Skype interviewing with us. Sometimes phone appointments if you end up needing to have some support with the phone appointment, but really kind of getting that idea, but it gives you a little bit more time to prepare. So again, reading their job description, using their terminology, but not copying and pasting it, but definitely using their terminology. So use the words that they're using, because you never know who's going to be reading it. Is it going to be a machine that reads it, like an applicant tracking software? So is it going to be a machine that reads your resume and has preloaded words in there and is just trying to get hits on how many times have you mentioned words? Is it going to be somebody from an HR department that maybe doesn't have knowledge of the industry, but again, they're kind of just using, we need to know this is the job description? Or is it going to be people that are more maybe knowledgeable about the industry and that type of thing? So I'm going to give you an example about this. And with our career counselor positions, we get a lot of wonderful applicants, both from the HESL program here at UNC and across the nation, as well as counseling programs. And we get a lot of counselors that will put in, you know, all of their counseling experience, and they have wonderful experience. It's not what we're asking for, and so sometimes they may not highlight the things that we're actually asking for, and they're focused kind of on the counseling experience. But we have an office that we have to refer to anybody for their mental health support and needs. So that is not something that our office does, so that is not something that really stands out when we're looking at different applicants. And they, again, may have years and years and years of counseling experience, and yet for our role in our career counseling office, that's not something that stands out like it would higher education, or maybe working with students, first generation college students, for example, or having assessment type of experience and that type of thing. Those are things that stand out for us. So again, that's how maybe somebody in like a community counseling or clinical counseling realm might tweak their resume a little bit more to our office, look at our website, look at the university website, as far as like what is the demographic of people, what are our values within our office, what is our mission, university as well as office, that type of thing. And then looking at our job description. I think with the job description, the things that you really want to highlight is definitely highlighting the somehow highlighting the required, anything that's required, because those are generally things, if they can't see it, then you may not even get past the first level of review. So any of the required things, as well as the additional or the other things, you would also want to highlight. So really the idea is to go ahead and engage the employer every 6 seconds. And so a lot of times we want to think about our order of information. So again, as we're thinking through like tailoring it and that type of thing, when you're looking at your bulleted statements, maybe for one employer, the order that you have from 1 to 5, for say, let's say that that's good for one employer, but maybe for another employer, like, you know what, I need to bring 4 and 5 up to 1 and kind of rearrange. So that's even taking it to that level, and again, tweaking language a little. Okay, so now I am going to take a quick second to see if people are having any questions on resume, CV, or if not, we're going to continue on to cover letters. I know we got started a little late. We got about 15 more minutes, and so I'm going to go ahead, and I don't see any questions coming in. Keep them coming in if you have any. So here I've talked about like resume, CVs, getting them targeted to employers so that they stand out and that type of thing. So why are we still using cover letters? Well, basically, it is still considered part of the application process. I think the other thing that's really neat about cover letters is that it gives you the opportunity to do a little bit more storytelling. So I don't know, for me, this is how I used to feel like when I thought about writing a cover letter. I just was like, I just can't do it because it just seems so hard. So my hope is after today that it will be a little bit easier if you've ever struggled with writing a cover letter. So basically what you're wanting to do is engage them in the story. And then the cool thing is that you are the one that holds the key to that story. You know your experiences up to this date and time, the things that you've learned, the things you achieved, accomplished, the things that you're excited about. Why did you get into the industry? So all of that type of stuff is what we're trying to do. And if you think about, all of you went through graduate admission essays, and this would be a shortened version of a graduate admission essay, with more maybe geared towards like your professional self, as well as like referring back to your resume, and then like looking at the employer itself too. So again, what is your story? It is it's in paragraph format. You're definitely taking a few pieces from your resume, storytelling around a couple of things that you want to share with an employer. Also noting that you want to also keep the things too and build on your resume cover letter for when you're going into interviewing. So there's probably not a lot of things that can go worse. Well, there are things that can go worse, but it's not great when you get to an interview and basically somebody has said the exact same thing that is on those two documents. Now, you can easily be highlighting the experiences on those two documents in an interview. I think it's just that you want to even more storytell through it and give them more of the quantifying examples and that type of thing. All right. So a lot of times, generally there's 4 paragraphs to your story or your cover letter. Sometimes 5 paragraphs, just depending, but usually it's about a page is what we're looking at. We try to limit it to the page. So the first paragraph, I'm going to go ahead and kind of go through them right now, but the first paragraph, we're really looking at an introduction to yourself and your strongest qualifications and how did you learn about the position. So, it might just be, I'm a current UNC graduate student in the clinical counseling program. I'm looking to graduate in May of 2019, and I have done some mental health internships with individuals and families, and I'm hoping to work with your company. I met you at a job fair. So in that paragraph, if you've met them somewhere, or if you have, if someone has referred you to the position, that's a great place to let them know that connection. In your first paragraph. So that could be an example of how you would do that. The second paragraph where the person is juggling there is really more geared towards like what you have done and what you have learned and developed and that type of thing, more from like your academics or your work or your volunteer experience, all of those experiences. So it really relates back to your resume or more of your harder skills, like the things that you have done, completed, that you're working on, that type of thing, and storytelling through some of those examples. Okay, so that's the second paragraph. Then the third one is me at 3 o'clock. I'm always, if you're ever in my office, I'm always looking for something sweet to eat at 3 o'clock. And I always like to say to students, like, what is sweet about the company? Why are you choosing that company over another company within the industry to apply for? And it's got to be things other than, to earn money, to get a job, that type of thing. We need to think a little bit more about it. So the key to get an idea of where you find the information, I know for me personally, when I was doing cover letters before I started out here at Career Services as a graduate student, I really struggled with that paragraph, and it's because I didn't know how to write it. And I was kind of writing it to a fictitious company and that type of thing. So if you look at their website, if you look at their mission statement, look at the job description, learn a little bit more about them, and ask yourself, why am I choosing University of Northern Colorado over Colorado State, for instance? What is it about the two? This is for me, but why am I choosing this company? That should help you write that and write it well. And then also, what can you bring to the company? I think that's equally as important. So it's fit for you and it's fit for them. So those are the two things that you want to keep in mind with the third paragraph. And then the fourth paragraph is kind of future forward. So thanking them for their time, providing them with your contact information. And then if you plan on following up with them, providing them a time frame when you would do that. Now, do keep in mind that if an employer is asked for people not to follow up, please do respect that. That is something that would get you kicked out of the applicant pool right away. But if you feel comfortable following up with an employer, and as long as they haven't told you not to, you're more than welcome to do that. And kind of giving you an idea of time frame wise, that seems to be a popular question that I get. But I would say after an end date, job closing, 5 days after, something like that, 5 days to a week. If you're applying, you could always kind of just base it on a week. Do know that if it has an open or close date, most likely they're going to have to keep it open until then, and they wouldn't be able to give you really that much of a time frame at that point. If it says open till filled, that type of thing, you're getting your application in, then I would give it like 5 to 7 days. One of the things I do caution is that some people don't feel comfortable with following up with an employer, and that's perfectly fine if you don't. Please don't put on your cover letter that you intend to follow up with them if you truly don't intend to, or if that's not comfortable, because one of the things that our employers say about our students the most is that they don't follow up. So that's something that just want to make sure that, you know, if you're going to put that statement in there, make sure that you are following up with the employer to see what the next steps are, or see if there's any questions that you can answer. Please try not to put to schedule an interview. That comes across a little bit aggressive in the process. So again, it's more to make sure you've received my materials, or if there's any questions that I can, any initial questions I can answer, that type of thing. So as you can see, I mean, I'm sure as you can imagine, like the second and third paragraphs are really where you're selling yourself and telling your story to an employer. So those are two very important paragraphs. And I do have to tell a story about this cover letter, because sometimes, again, as I said before, I get a little surprised that this happens. People that apply for our positions in our office, a lot of them have some knowledge about career services and how to teach people how to do these types of things. And when mistakes come through, it just blows my mind. But one thing I would caution you from doing is editing an existing document. And here's one of the reasons why. So different career counselor search, but same position. I had an applicant that I was really excited about. We're weeding through about 35 applicants. There's 4 of us on the search committee that are making decisions. And I'm wanting to get this person. I'm like, I really like this person. I want to talk to them on the phone. I want them to be one of 10. And I was really engaged with them. They were addressing our values in our team and that type of thing, as well as UNC as a larger picture. And got to their very last paragraph where it said, "Thank you for your time and consideration for the career counselor position at Colorado State University." I literally threw that resume on the floor, stomped on it a couple of times, because I had spent more than that 6 to 10 seconds looking at it. I had spent a lot of time looking, and I was really engaged with that person, that type of thing. But that right there moved that from my yes pile to my, there's no way we're going to interview that person. So that's something just to kind of keep in mind. I know everybody's busy, but if you do edit an existing document, please make sure that you are triple, quadruple checking the document. I would encourage you just to start over. Hopefully we have your resume to a place where you're easily able to get that ready for the application, and you're spending your time on the cover letter. Because that is such an important document, and that's really how you can also win a company over through that. And it gives you that time to kind of refocus on the company when you allow yourself to somewhat start fresh. So again, that's my tip from being on the other side of the search committee and receiving a cover letter that, you know, was definitely something I was excited about, and then in the same few minutes became very disappointed with too. So questions about the way, oh, here we've got a good question. What is the best way to phrase that you will be following up? That's a great question. Probably one of the best ways is just basically saying, you know, I will follow up with you on the week of whatever to, you know, check in on my status, or to check in on the next steps, that type of thing. Or I've even seen I'll just be following up with you within this time frame. So hopefully that's answered your question. That's the other thing. All of these things, our office works with you individually, so we can easily sit down with you and look at your resume, CV, your cover letter. Definitely we will work with you on interviewing. We in I think the end of March have one coming up on interviewing too, and salary negotiation tips. Okay, great. So it looks like, okay, any questions about the cover letter? I know it's a lot. Oh, and the other thing I was going to say, we often have students come in who are doing a cover letter for a class and that type of thing, and they get to my office and they're like, this is hard. And I'm like, yeah, it's hard because you don't actually have an employer you're applying for. It's really hard if you don't. So you know, again, I try to tell people definitely get your resume, CV ready, kind of ready to go for the industry. Maybe hold off on the cover letter till you're actively applying for positions, and then utilize our office. For us, it helps if we have the job description. We can look at your cover letter at the same time and your resume all together, and we can help provide feedback for that particular position. But these are very hard to write if there's not a organization that you're writing it for actively. Okay, how do we submit resume and cover letter for feedback if we live long distance? That's a great question. So to us, yes. So we have, I'll give you an email address right now. It's career.services with an S on the end. So career.services@unco.edu. So that's our main office email. And we definitely do email critiques with our students. So you send it to them, they then send out an email. So our student staff, our undergraduate student staff, then send out an email to all of the career counselors and ask for who is available to take the resume, any of the things that you need, online support that way, or email counseling that way, so we can definitely help you with that. So even if you have just a question, who is able to take this? And then for our email services, we allow our counselors up to a week to get back to you with that feedback. So just kind of keeping that in mind, but that's definitely a way that we can support you if you are needing that. We also do phone appointments too. Okay. All right, so I get the question all the time. How do I be the red tulip in a whole field of yellow tulips? Basically, I think if you really follow some of these tips, and if you come utilize our office to help you in developing your documents and that type of thing, that will help you with that. So it's targeting to the employer. I always say, think about employers. When you think about going through the job search, think about employers being egotistical, okay? They want to know it's about them, all right? So if they can see their name on documents, if they can see that you are, you know, getting things for them, for their job, for their company, that is gonna help you stand out from somebody that is just randomly, and there's people that do it, trust me, randomly passing out resumes, cover letters, not even taking time to look at them or update them. It really does help you stand out. So those are some of the ways. All right. So we have just, it's right now 5 o'clock. I know we got started a few minutes late, so if you have a few more minutes, or those of you that do, I'm going to go ahead and stay on for a couple more minutes to talk about social media considerations. And I think really the main things that I want you to be mindful of with social media is, number one, employers are looking at social media. So employers, when they have an applicant, they are trying to find out anything they can about them. So they're trying to see, what can we see about you on Facebook? They're definitely looking at LinkedIn. If you have a Twitter account, they're trying to follow you on Twitter. So they are checking social media. And I think it's important for us to let students know that that is definitely happening. So I think anything that you can do to, you know, heighten your privacy levels on Facebook, that type of thing. Make sure that you're reviewing tags if you're being tagged in posts, especially as you're actively job seeking, I think is a very important thing. We're going to talk a little bit more. My focus is not going to be on Facebook, but we're going to talk a little bit more about LinkedIn, but definitely kind of thinking about that. So generally, I like to ask, and it's a little bit harder through Zoom to ask this, especially with kind of the time crunch, but who all has a LinkedIn page, and if they've been using it and that type of thing. And if you want to go ahead and comment, let me know any ideas or thoughts that you might have around LinkedIn, that type of thing, please feel free to do that. I think for people that are job searching, it's a very beneficial tool to use. And there's a lot of, I think, mystery for some around LinkedIn, as well as just maybe, I don't know if it's resistance, but just not necessarily wanting to do that, because some people just don't want to be on social media, or maybe others, you know, think it's, how is it different than Facebook, and just maybe don't totally understand. So I think a lot of it is the mystery around it. So maybe to demystify and help you all, you know, if you have any questions with LinkedIn, that type of thing, maybe get a better understanding. This is something our office can support you with as well. But really, for active job seekers, it is a great way to be job searching. So it is a job bank. So it is a way to job search, number one. It is a wonderful way to network with people. And with that being said, I highly recommend, whether you're on LinkedIn or not, if you're not on LinkedIn, definitely get a LinkedIn account, sooner than later. And if you are on LinkedIn, make sure you connect with the UNC Alumni Association page. Our alumni are everywhere, and it's really the once a bear, always a bear. I'm an alum of UNC, and I would literally help any student, kind of with getting, part of it's because it's my job, but with getting to their next stage and that type of thing. But I certainly get excited when people want to learn about my career path and that type of thing, when they want to talk to me. So if I've got a student that maybe is in the program that I went through while I was at UNC, I'm going to be certainly excited to talk with them about my job here at UNC and that type of thing. And just know that our alumni really, overall, the majority feel that way. They're very engaged alumni. We, as an office, work very closely with our alumni association, and our alumni are very engaged. So again, follow them on LinkedIn if you're not already. Twitter, the other thing I want to say about LinkedIn is, for those of you that maybe are just starting out with LinkedIn, or maybe you've created a profile but you haven't really done a lot, take it in chunks. Definitely dedicate some time, but take it in chunks. And as I was learning today from Cintas a little bit more, I had known that the summary is a really important thing, but they were able, so I was learning from an employer who is actively always on LinkedIn looking for candidates and that type of thing. So your summary is really important to summarize you, but also bring your kind of personal quality into it and that type of thing. So it's not all about your jobs and that type of thing. It's about like you as a person. And I think employers a lot of times are looking also for like that fit with the company, right? So kind of thinking through it that way, and then take it in smaller chunks, because it can be overwhelming if you're like, I'm just going to sit down and do LinkedIn for 8 hours. Anybody would probably have a hard time with that. So take it in smaller chunks. I would say definitely creating a profile, getting your picture on there, a professional picture on there quickly. By the way, if you need a professional headshot, we will have our university photographer at our career fair February 21st, which is a week from Thursday. So they'll be at the career fair from 12 to 4. So that's a great place for you to get a professional headshot if you would like to do that. So again, our office can support you if you have questions about LinkedIn. And then Twitter is a really, really good way to get up-to-date information and research employers. So those are a couple of really good things, and I think social media considerations to think about. Obviously, on the other end, be mindful of your accounts and that type of thing. So for instance, for LinkedIn, if somebody's searching for you, you're an active job seeker and somebody's looking for Elizabeth Mahoney. Elizabeth Mahoney doesn't have a professional headshot. Elizabeth Mahoney doesn't really care about LinkedIn and about networking and that type of thing. So I think it's one of those things that if you're going to use it, definitely use it and that type of thing, and try to maximize your profile. Somebody says, I have a LinkedIn account and have spent some time on it. So that's good. I've always kept an online resume and connect professionally. And actually, I'm glad that that was brought up, because I think it's important to think about this. The other thing is this is the coolest way to be able to network with people. That being said, I think when you connect with somebody, if you don't know them, make sure that you send them a quick note and say, hey, I'm Elizabeth Mahoney, and I'm a University of Northern Colorado alumni, and I'm actually interested in transferring or moving to the Chicago area, so I'd like to learn more about the area there, that type of thing. Or the University of Chicago, I'm considering employment there, and I see that you have a position there. I want to learn a little bit more. So it's really a good way to learn more about a particular organization that an alum is at, just to, if you are moving to a different area, a good way to connect with people. Please remember that your UNC alumni network is definitely your network. And so, again, very engaged, and they would be happy to chat with you. Okay. Looks like overall, people do have LinkedIn and are excited about it. So I think we talked about that. So I want to take, we're at 5:07. Sorry about the delay, but we did get going a little bit late. I want to take a couple moments here to see if there is any last questions that you might have. I'm going to go ahead and fire away with the questions if you have them, but I'm going to put up our access and talk about our services while some questions are coming up. If you're near or on campus, we would love to see you in our offices. And we do have our drop-in hours, so there's no scheduled appointments. And those are Monday through Friday from 12 to 3 while classes are in session. So like spring break, we won't have any drop-in hours, but any other time while classes are in session, we have them. We do not host them over the summer either. You can also schedule an appointment with a career counselor one of two ways, by either going through Handshake, which is our job database. So you all are in there already, and if that's something you haven't looked at for positions, I do encourage you to look there as well. But you can schedule an appointment through Handshake, or you can call our office and our student staff will go ahead and get you set up with an appointment with a career counselor. For our students, our graduate students especially, we know that you're very busy, and so we wanted to make sure that we are easily accessible to you. So we offer phone appointments, Skype appointments, and email counseling, as we discussed before. Again, our email is career.services@unco.edu for email services, and we are located on the main campus in Greeley on the University Center and the second floor at Career Services. All right. Okay, it looks like that we don't have any questions. I'm glad it sounds like, what was that?
That was just me turning on.
Oh, okay. All right, so it looks like we, somebody just says that they're gonna start using some of these pointers. So again, I certainly hope to see you all. I'm gonna turn it over to Daniel and let him wrap everything up. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Elizabeth. I'm gonna give you another minute, see if there's any questions about this presentation or other presentations that are being offered in the future. But I also wanted to thank Elizabeth for taking time out of her schedule to join us and inform us of all these tips and tricks to stand out while working with the employment field. So I also want to thank you all for joining us as well. This workshop was recorded and will be posted on Canvas for all of you to watch at a later date if you wish. Hopefully by the end of the week or by beginning of next week, depending on how technology works. So I'm not seeing any questions, so thank you all for coming, and I'm going to go ahead and end this meeting. Y'all have a good afternoon.
Thank you.